So, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the VSSN Day Seminar on volunteering in health and social care in the context of COVID-19. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Angela Ellis-Payne. I am currently the co-chair of the Voluntary Sector Studies Network and a research fellow at the University of Birmingham. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon. I would also like to introduce and particularly to thank my colleague Jürgen Gwaltz, who you can't actually see at the moment because he has turned his screen off, but he is here underneath that beautiful V. So Jürgen is, oh, hi Jürgen. Jürgen is one of the VSSN steering group members and he is director of the Institute for Volunteering Research. And Jürgen is hosting today's seminar. So thank you very much, Jürgen, for organising today's seminar. The way that VSSN seminars run is through people very kindly volunteering to host them for us. And we are incredibly grateful for that. So thank you, Jürgen, for hosting today's session. And thank you all of you for attending and indeed for speaking at it. So the focus today is volunteering in health and social care in the context of COVID-19. What an important topic. As I'm sure that many of you will be fully aware of, volunteering is and always has been extensive across health and social care. It's one of the kind of main, one of the largest kind of forms of volunteering, one of the largest areas in which people volunteer. Volunteers are found in health and social care in the voluntary sector, also of course in the public sector, and indeed in the private sector. All so volunteers kind of extensively involved across the whole range of providers of health and social care. Last few years, of course, have seen a renewed drive to increase the numbers of volunteers in healthcare. So we've seen a whole range of initiatives to try and get more people to volunteer, to undertake a wider range of roles. So we've seen an expansion of volunteering into new areas within health and social care, but also in new settings. So a real kind of push to involve volunteers in new ways, in ways that they've not been involved before. Of course, the current context of COVID has changed that even further. A dramatically accelerated kind of push to get more people involved in health and social care. At the same time, of course, as many people have had to stop volunteering in health and social care settings. So there's kind of dual tensions of trying to get more people to support the health and social care as volunteers, while also having to manage the reality that many people have had to stop volunteering in those settings, either through their kind of personal situations or through the restrictions of the context in which they've been volunteering. Of course, we've had the NHS Responders Scheme and the work that has done to engage volunteers, but also many kind of local initiatives that have been established to engage volunteers. So lots going on in terms of involving more people and getting more people to volunteer. But what exactly that looks like, how volunteering manifests, how it could or should be organised and is experienced by people in different health and social care settings, I don't think as yet is fully understood, let alone how all that's been affected and how it's changing through the context of COVID. So we hope that through today's seminar, through inviting colleagues to speak to us from a range of different disciplinary and practice backgrounds, we really hope to explore the different methods, contexts and new directions in which volunteering and volunteering research is taking in health and social care. So we've got an absolutely fantastic lineup of speakers today. Thank you to Jürgen for putting the programme together, and thank you for our speakers for being willing to join the session today. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the different presentations. So just to talk you briefly through the agenda for this afternoon's session, Jürgen, if you wouldn't mind, please moving me on a slide. Thank you very much. So as soon as I shut up in a moment, we will then move into our first session where we have two speakers thinking about what it's like to volunteer in health and social care under COVID. So first of all, we're going to hear from Carol Hebden, who is going to talk to us about her study, which is about speaking about methods, and her presentation on phenomenological, I can never say that word, insights into volunteering, and really into the relationship between volunteers and their organisation. We are then going to hear from Heather Edwards, who is going to talk to us about kind of really her experiences in the policy and practice worlds of volunteering, and a talk about insights for research with people with dementia and their experiences of volunteering. We're then going to have a nice half-an-hour break where you can go and get a cup of coffee and cake. Unfortunately, we're not able to provide that for you, so you'll have to rely on your own kitchens to do that, but there will be a decent break so we can all rest our eyes from the screen. We'll then move into the second session, which is going to focus on the link between volunteering and health inequalities under COVID. And again, we've got two speakers. We're going to hear from Jane South, who has got years of experience of volunteering research and indeed policy. And Jane is going to particularly draw on reflections on volunteering in the public health context. We're then going to hear from Mike Locke, who is going to talk to us with a theme of disconnected discourses. And again, Mike has got years of experience both in research and in the kind of practice world of volunteering. So we're delighted to welcome Mike this afternoon. Particularly, as you may have noticed, there's been a change of programme, and Mike has stood in at the last moment because unfortunately our other speaker was unable to make the event this afternoon. So particular thanks to Mike for joining us. So we think that together the programme will show the kind of enormous complexities of volunteering in health and social care, but also and for researching within that context, but also for the tremendous opportunities that exist for interdisciplinary working when researching volunteering in health and social care, particularly in the current context, and the importance of the research, it feels more important now than ever. So we hope that the conversation can go beyond questions of how we can recruit more volunteers, what motivates volunteers, how to effectively deploy them, but really to think about what it means for volunteering, for that experience of volunteering, and what it means for society as well. So that's how we're going to organise this afternoon. That's how what we hope to achieve. Before we actually move into our first speakers, just a few kind of instructions, if you'd like, in terms of how it's going to work over Zoom webinar. So a few instructions to you as attendees, if that is okay. So we hope that you will all engage in the discussion, that you will ask questions, that you will join in with reflections. You will notice on the bottom of your screens that you have three functions. First of all, we'd like to draw your attention to the chat function. I can see that some of you are already using the chat function, which is absolutely fantastic, thank you. What we hope that you will do is to use the chat function to introduce yourselves. Please do say hello, tell everyone who you are, why you're here. So please do start doing that as soon as you're ready. You will see that Jürgen has already put up the biographies of all our speakers today. We didn't want to spend a lot of time kind of going through those biographies, but hope you can read them so you understand the expertise that the panel bring to you today. As I say, please do use that chat function to introduce yourselves to each other, to share reflections as we're going through, to share resources that are relevant as we go through the presentations. You will then also see that you have a Q&A function. We hope to use the Q&A function for you to pose questions for our speakers. So as our speakers go through their presentations, please do put questions in there that you would like to pose to those speakers at the end of their talks. So each of our speakers is going to speak to about 20 minutes, and then we'll have time, 10-15 minutes for Q&As straight after their presentations. So please do post your questions in there. I will then read those Q&As read those questions and pose them to our speakers. So please do put them in there as we go. You will also see that there is a raise hand function. If you want to raise your hand to ask a question directly, please do that, and we'll see that if we can kind of make the technology work to enable you to come unmuted and you can ask that question directly. But for the For the Q&A sessions in the first few sessions, we hope to rely on that Q&A function. The third session of the afternoon is going to be a panel. Here we hope to make it a bit more interactive. We're going to bring all our speakers back. There'll be a greater chance for discussion and reflection. At this point, what we're going to do is to ask you all if you are happy to kind of come on screen and to share your video. We won't be recording at that stage. We are recording now, but we won't record the panel discussion because we really want to invite you all to come on screen, to unmute yourselves, to ask your questions, to join in the discussion, to make it far more interactive. So there will be that opportunity after the second break of the day. I'm giving you the heads up now because we will be asking you to turn your videos on. So if you're still in your pajamas, or if you haven't brushed your hair as yet, you might like to do so before that second break, so we can ask you to turn your videos on. So this is just a quick heads up. So hopefully that is okay for everyone. If things aren't clear, if you've got any questions for us, please do jot it in the chat function. If it's a general question, if it's a question for our speakers, please put it in the Q&A. But as I say, hopefully that's all clear. That is enough for me. I am first now going to hand over to our first speaker of the day, who, as I say, is Carol Hebden. Carol is going to speak on behalf of her and her colleague about what is it like to volunteer. A phenomenological insight investigating the relationship between volunteers and their organisations. And Carol will be able to say that word far better than I can. So over to you, Carol. Thank you very much indeed. So you've got 20 minutes. I'm going to give you a kind of 2-minute warning sign if you're getting close. Thank you, Carol. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's delightful to be here with you today. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen with everybody so that we can start to begin our slides. Okay, so first of all, this was a small-scale study which we completed in 2019. And one might ask is, what is the relevance actually in today? Well, actually, there is quite an interesting correlation between a pre-COVID world and actually the world in which we are all inhabiting at the moment. And as I said, we really wanted to bring this to discussion to enable the outcome of our study. So our aims really initially of this study were to explore the experiences of volunteers who are active in their roles with health and social care charities. That was really quite important. And also to explore the lived experience of charity leads as well. So, and looking at the relationship of what that's like to be present in the relationship. As I said, it was a small-scale study, so we looked at 2 sets of participants in this, one of volunteers who were formally recruited and the charity leads who were registered charity and the charity commission. And really we wanted to explore the nuances in the relationship through a phenomenological lens. There you go, Angela. And that's why we wanted to do this. In as much that the methodological lens really was through the philosopher Gadamer, and in the sense that it enabled us to take a window of observation through the language that participants used. Was a reflection of what it was like for them, and that was very important to us in this. And also to understand that there was very much multiple truths within this. There wasn't just one truth, there were multiple truths with that. And so this study really looked towards the meaning of what it was like more than anything. And that was very important. So what we did was to first of all look at the volunteering literature as it exists, which is hugely diverse, vibrant, and absolutely multiplex. But also recognizing that there are multiple strands of academic thoughts. And what this does is compartmentalize some of the studies within law, within economics, within sociology, psychology, and on and beyond. And also to understand that it was largely quantitative, and really we wanted to take a qualitative look at this. So this really helped us into, if you like, contextualize where the relationship existed. So I apologize for the smallness of this screen, but hopefully that you can actually see this. So in order to provide a discussion about this, we wanted to place where the context of the relationship existed. And you know, from a volunteer perspective, in this study, we're not going to break open the sort of pro-social behaviours and the discussions around all of that, but to identify that the influences of a volunteer perspective brings into the benevolent intention through time benevolence. And that is, you know, in a sense, we saw that through the literature and everything, is the contribution to the relationship that volunteers bring. On the other side was the organisational element of it. And, you know, there is a huge element of external factors which drive the sort of organisational perspective, including organisational perspective in this. So what we're saying is that the two elements of volunteers and their organisations, with the external factors and the influences, actually bring into the relationship in which to continue doing what charities do wonderfully well. So we adapted an online survey method to reflect a qualitative paradigm. And this was so that we can focus purely just on the dialectal tone to which participants were engaging with. And because we used the philosophical underpinning, it meant that we could analyse the data that was just given in terms of the text that was present. So we used our multiple methods to get this out there using social media hashtags, you know, and it was all done anonymously. We were really just interested in the presence of language. We conducted semi-structured interviews with organisational leads and volunteer participants, and this really enabled us to explore what that was like being within the relationship a little bit deeper, and the presence of being within the relationship. So in analysing the evidence, we adopted a thematic analysis using Braun and Clark. And each sort of participant was analysed in a holistic way, and this was really important. We also mindful of, as a practitioner and in a sense an emic researcher, being in this environment for the last 20 years, it was really important that we did this, and also we analysed once all the data had been amassed. What we looked at was taking the participant groups and presenting it thematically in terms of their life world. And we used thematic and maps also to present to interview participants, just to clarify that that was a reflection of their world. And we looked at an interpretive positioning of what was it like being present in the relationship. What did the findings expose? Well, we noticed that there was an ambiguity and assumptions adopted by both organisations and volunteers in the first instance, and the complexity around why people volunteer was present in there. But we also noticed that there was a fragility around how organisations navigate the emotions of a dual tenure workforce. So, for example, some, understanding that there may be a hierarchy within that. So, a paid an employed person may have some sort of hierarchy over volunteers, and that was a challenge, especially if there's all sorts of tensions that were in that. There was also some level of disconnect in terms of psychological contracts and really about how it was variable depending on the organisational culture. So in actually reflecting the life world of the two groups of participants, we looked at the volunteer life world and we found that there were three themes, and I guess what we'd expect. But that was a generosity, acceptance and being valued. And there was common themes that, volunteers offer organisations within health and social care their attributes, their skills, their motivations. many of them driven by the fact they've been either been beneficiaries of the organisation, wanting to contribute, and many others. But that they also received, received acceptance from this. So they received a lot from their generosity. And one of them being, in a sense, that sense of freedom through non-obligation. They felt that that was important to them as well. And being valued. Now, being valued was interesting because it was like, what was it like being present in the organisational culture? And that threw up some, at times variance. So the commitment was there, and some were very much valued that, and some highlighted some other areas as well. But also about the essence of being appreciated, and they are noticing the difference between tokenistic and authentic appreciation as well. So referring to the organisational lead themes, there was two. And one was, what was that like facilitating their generosity? And this was coming through the actual clarification around navigating these external influences. And this was pre-COVID. And I can't imagine what that would be like now in the throes of COVID. And the challenges in terms of managing a dual tenure workforce. But also in the acceptance, they really understood the acceptance of the lived experience of their volunteers in underpinning their mission statement as a health and social charity was a really important acceptance for them. And also the acceptance of a diverse skill range, enabling them to truly act on their mission objectives. But more importantly, the value of the economic resources that we know is beneficial for charities. Again, just to reiterate, this was before COVID took our world in the direction that it has. So from all this and analysing this, really as a researcher's practitioner, I really wanted to see where, if there was a conceptual element, and bringing together the themes that were derived out of the two groups of participants, we thought that there was a conceptual cycle of reciprocal value based on the three principles, that of generosity, acceptance, and value. It perhaps wasn't enough that there was just a giving and receiving. In a world where it's a nuanced relationship and the generosity is based on non-obligational behaviours, the principle of value could be woven on both sides. So by placing a conceptual cycle of reciprocal value enables perhaps a window for organisations and volunteers to truly come together, particularly at this time, and to truly value all that they offer in terms of health and social care. So returning to the first map which I put on, which is where we identified where the relationship exists, it could be possible that the relationship of reciprocal value sits somewhere in the middle, that we continue to understand a value-based approach between organisations and their volunteers. So just in concluding, if that's okay with you, there's just some thoughts really. In a COVID world, what can this offer? So perhaps maybe just a continued reflexivity around the nuanced relationship between volunteers and their organisations, recognising that volunteers bring their emotional motivations in a huge range, and that the constructs of running an organisation currently at this time. So this is not a straightforward. But continuing the discussion about how non-obligation is managed within organisations, particularly at this time when the need is greater for beneficiaries within our society. And perhaps defining maybe a psychological contract that's fulfilling relationship of benevolence, and enabling organisational culture to reflect on how volunteers are hosted. I'd like to thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Carol. Thank you particularly for sticking for time, and also for some great insights through your research there. And I'm looking forward to hearing more in the question and answers. And I'm sure we've all got some questions and points of discussion to kind of raise with you. But before we come to those, I'm going to move over to Heather, and we can save those questions for you, Carol, if we'll take the questions for both of you together afterwards, if that's okay. So we're going to hear now from Heather Edwards. Heather can introduce herself to you briefly, and she's going to talk to us about views from my window, practice insights from 2 volunteering initiatives under COVID-19. So over to you, Heather. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me the chance to speak. I'll be giving you a very different view, a very sort of practical view of what it's been like to volunteer and be engaged in research during COVID. And it almost feels like an alcoholic thing, because I think, like many of us, I'm Heather and I'm a compulsive volunteer. And so until March, I was volunteering with really several organisations within Norwich to do with dementia, Age UK, National Health Service, Mental Health Trust, Barchester, North Care, anything you care to mention, I was volunteering. And then, of course, it all had to stop with lockdown and with the pandemic. But there was one exception, and that was Come Singing, which is a very small little organisation, voluntary organisation, which I run with a small group of other volunteers. And we've kept going steadily throughout the pandemic, but we've had to adapt radically. We focus on dementia, and our main thing is we deliver singing and music to care homes, sheltered housing, hospitals, both dementia hospitals and general hospitals, and in large community groups in Norwich. And until the pandemic, we were delivering about 21 regular groups a month and reaching well over 200 people, which is not bad for 6 volunteers and 6 extras. And we are very tiny. And to give you an idea of scale, we don't have any regular income whatsoever. We do receive £300 a year, which is the rent for one venue room for a community group. But otherwise, we just have legacies occasionally, and a tea and coffee saucer at one session, which brings in about 12 quid a month. But we still manage 21 sessions a month. And we've always seen this tininess as quite an advantage, seriously, because where other organisations may be cut off because of lack of funding or political change or whatever, we're too small for that. We just, that can't happen. We've never had funding, so we can't be stopped. And also we're small, agile and determined. And so sometimes we can get under the wire where a larger organisation might just have to give up. That's been pretty useful, I think. COVID came as a body blow to us, as it did to everybody else, because the whole essence of what we do is face-to-face contact, bringing people together for peer support in groups, and singing. And every one of those has got a no-no to it, particularly singing, because of the droplet transmission for singing. Who knows if ever we'll manage to do that again. So we were effectively scuppered. But equally, we realized that the needs of people with dementia were radically heightened by the pandemic. Dementia is a very isolating condition. And given that we were all isolated, this made things a million times worse, particularly for people living at home. We all know about the drastic things that happened in care homes, but the plight of people who are living at home with dementia now and managing is just dreadful, because they're cut off from friends, relatives, sources of practical support on a daily level, sources of stimulation, the routines that hold them together. And if you're an elderly carer, the physical and emotional toll is huge. And if you're living with dementia, the lack of cognitive stimulation is really disastrous. And this is a story that needs to be told in the future. And it was clear to us that we had to keep doing something for the people who really rely on us as a lifeline. We made one CD that was called Lifeline to Happiness, because that's what people had called us. But we couldn't get at the people. So we had to think fast. So what we did first of all was we set up telephone befriending. We've got a set, oh, thank you, Jürgen. We've got a set of volunteers. And so we set up a telephone tree so that, we divided with people who were open to this. We set up regular telephone calls. And this has been really good. And we also facilitated informal networks of contact between families and carers, where that seemed, to be useful. And then we hit on the idea of having an interactive newsletter, which would be built on things that the singers themselves sent in. Either they could send them by post or email, or could tell us by telephone, and we could include them. That could be pictures or accounts of how life was for them under lockdown, memories of music, poems, all sorts of things. And we would sort of link it together with musical quizzes on musical themes and general chit chat. And we called it Keyhole, which was short for Keep Your Hopes Alive. And also, you know, an idea of a view from outside when you were locked in. And it really was actually terrific. There was a huge outburst of creativity and invention on the part of our singers. Let's see, I've got some examples of it somewhere. Oh yes, actually we send, one thing I forgot to say is we send it out largely by email. We've got a very large circulation list. And that means that as well as just writing what people have written, if there's a quiz, we can link the answers to music and videos via YouTube so that people actually have something they could sing with or watch. So it is really an interactive newsletter. But sometimes we get people who will just say a few words down the phone to tell us what they'd like to put in. One of my favorites was, "From the kitchen window, I can see my apple tree in the garden. It makes me glad to be alive." I mean, those were the days in the spring when it was lovely weather. But, you know, there's not much more he can say. But sometimes we get things like haikus, limericks, larger anecdotes, you know, wonderful photographs. And some are funny and encouraging, and others aren't so much. And one poem from one quite prolific poet was read out recently at the Leeds Dementia Education and Empowerment Group, much to the delight of the author. I know you can read it, but you know, now it applies to half of us anyway. Now, if I was a beauty, of course I'd prance in Zoom, but no, I'm just an old hag in an untidy room. Short and stout with spectacles and shaggy silver hair. Now, if I was more glamorous, no doubt I'd be right there. Well, to keep with the present times and so become a star, I must tidy up the place to be admired from afar. Yea, verily accepting computerized mentality, as people say, it really can spark up one's vitality, which is not bad if you're living with dementia, is it really? I mean, and also the spirit and the deep were delighted to, you know, read it out. Somebody tangling with technology. She hates technology, but she'll have a go. And they felt it showed great spirit. There's another one as well, which was not so cheery. And this is how it arrived. You know, can't get out. I'm all alone sitting in my little room. I think she means the reason being that I'm so sad. I've got a bad leg and it's making me mad. My knee is worn out and a new one I need. An operation it will have to be. And it's making me housebound, as you can see. The waiting list it will have to be. I've waited 9 months only to be told that it will be another 4 or 5 months. It's because of this virus. It's getting me down, but I'm limping along with a very big frown. But hopefully I will be walking along and we'll all be together singing our songs. I mean, very much the sort of virulent spirit surfacing at the end. But, you know, that's how it is to be living on your own in one room and in pain. And it's not terribly good. But as you can see, one of the things about having the newsletter means that we are in touch with our singers. We're actually keeping in touch with them, you know, if we're badgering them for another contribution or whatever. The author of the very first poem, the one about Zoom, is a wonderful, well, they're all wonderful. They're all magnificent, wonderful people. She had a diagnosis of dementia last autumn, lives on her own with no support. And she's becoming aware that she's very vulnerable and that she needs to move. She's in touch with the NHS and all the appropriate networks, but has somehow fallen through all the support systems. And so no one's helping her to move, and it's very difficult. Now, there's not much we can do, but there have been 2 occasions in the last couple of months when things have brewed up terribly dramatically, and we've been able to contact emergency services on her behalf. And this is one function of keeping in touch with people. particular moments. We can flag up concerns when there are moments of crisis. It's tricky. One thing we have managed to keep going with some semblance of normality is singing sessions to one particular care home. And we do that via Skype, because in a care home, in many care homes, people can actually sit together legitimately and enjoy singing and music together. So we Skype it in. It's a bit of a myth that people living with dementia get on well with technology. Even when they're tech savvy, they tend to find that the visual things, it's just too much input. They would rather have a telephone. But here, they've got used to speaking to me over the television screen. I can see their interactions. I can respond to them, and we could keep up a relationship, which is really quite important at times when the care home visiting is so restricted. And so that's been very important. We really, really enjoy that. And for some people, in particular need living at home, we've had to resort to come singing by telephone each week. Because some people, I'm thinking of one person in particular who suffers very much from depression as well as dementia. Music will go much further than words. And so we start off as a chat, and then something is a cue for a song, and we start singing, and one thing leads to another, and it usually ends up in gales of laughter. I mean, we did one this morning, and I nearly fell off my chair because we were and the dog started barking, and by the end, it has changed the rhythm of the life, even of the day, even if it's a slight annoyance. It changes the rhythm. It breaks up the routine. It's something different. It's a different mode of communication. And so, it has proved useful, and that's a regular part of the week for that. Yes, and then, well, there are lots of research links about singing and dementia, which I could perhaps put up later about that. And until March, Norfolk Library Service was hosting a large community session in the library, in the Millennium Forum Library in Norwich, attracting about 50 to 60 people a month. We've got 3 sessions like that, or had them. They were missing them, asked me to make videos each month to put on the library's website, just 20-minute videos of the usual warm-ups and a few sociable songs. And that was a bit of a challenge at first, because I'm not a singer. I have a voice like a horse, but I do play the piano. And so I was doing these 20-minute videos, but the people can view them at their convenience. They can go to the website. So if a day is becoming boring, or if somebody's restless, that can be put on, and someone can sing and remember a familiar face. Even if they can't stand my voice, I just actually have to preface it each time saying, sing loudly and do your best. But that's been a good thing. And they've been viewed many, many times, and surprisingly charitably, given that the group was 50 strong. I think the first video of the 5 we've done has been viewed 600 times. Another unexpected thing about COVID has been the need to support our volunteers. And that goes back very much to what Carol was saying, because they have invested so much time, love, and emotional commitment to the groups. They're concerned about the singers. They're now at home, often confronted with problems of their own. And, that's really quite tricky. And they feel helpless and useless, as all of us do. So we've needed to find alternative, real roles for them. So we found tech experts, expert photographers, people who could deliver newsletters, poetry experts, all sorts of things. We're just trying to find things that people can do to keep us going until we can get back to doing something that's absolutely practical. I'm trying to make sure I remember everything to say without going on too far. Yes, and I've been involved during COVID in various aspects of research to do with the volunteering. One thing which I haven't mentioned, there's not time really to mention it, is that I originated an intervention for people living with dementia called music mirrors, which is a way of capturing audio biographical memories and storing them for use in activities of daily life. And there's a very large research study in Zurich being carried on. It's just coming to the end of a 4-year study, and it's been in hospitals, care homes, and domestic settings throughout Switzerland. there should be a day-long conference in March. I mean, God knows what happens to conferences. I'm supposed to be going over there, but I can't imagine it somehow. But we're at the stage of putting together the publication, which will go out with this study. And so there are scholarly articles. It's a scientific study, various bits that I've had to write. They've got filmed case studies, pictures, all sorts of things like that. And on the day there's supposed to be a practical element by music students improvising on music mirrors. That's taken up a fair bit of time. During the summer I had the privilege of contributing a vignette about come singing work on a hospital ward to a paper written by Jürgen and colleagues at the Institute of Volunteering Research. And that really was a privilege, just putting something there for what will be a very important paper. And that's been accepted for publication by Health Expectations Journal. And as part of being a guest editor for the Journal of Public Mental Health, I was expected to write an article. I didn't realize that had come as part of the deal, so that came as a shock to me. So I wrote a study of use of music mirrors in Norse care, residential and care homes in Norfolk. They have 37 homes. So a study of use of music mirrors in those care homes and the work I did training staff to use them. And recently I took part in a research project by a student at Liverpool University on interventions involving music and dementia and how these have been affected by COVID. And if anything, I'm busier now with volunteering than ever before during lockdown. COVID's heightened the needs of people living with dementia, and it's going to take all our determination, creativity, and energy to do something about what is a dreadful situation. That's that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Heather. That was so interesting to hear your kind of reflections and your experiences. And I particularly kind of appreciated hearing about the different kind of methods you've used to engage people through lockdown, and thinking about my own kind of research and thinking about whether we can be doing more creative methods like that. That was really, really great to hear about that. Thank you. I should have mentioned at the beginning, of course, Heather, that you mentioned being a guest editor there. I should have mentioned that, of course, you've also just been awarded Outstanding Reviewer of the Year for the Emerald Award for Excellence. That's really great to hear. It'd be really interesting to hear your kind of reflections on that as well. So well done for that. I'm going to move now, open up the question and answers to give people the opportunity to raise questions to both of you. I can see you've already got a couple in the question and answer box, so I'll have a look at those in a moment. While I'm doing that, please do other people kind of put your questions in. Just a reminder, we've got 15 minutes now for question and answers, but equally we've also got time at the end of the day when all our speakers will come back together as a panel to have that wider discussion. So plenty of time now, both now and later, for questions. So please do be putting your questions in the question and answer box. I will take them out from here for now, and then later on we'll have time to all come on screen to have a wider discussion. So as I said, I'll start with some of the questions that have already come in. So first of all, a question specific to you, Carol. You mentioned during your presentation psychological contracts. So a question from Tony is, please can you tell us a little bit more about what you actually mean by psychological contracts? You kind of dropped it in there. Can you kind of tell everyone a little bit more about what exactly that is, and particularly how it kind of why it's so relevant to volunteering?
Yeah, so psychological contracts was something that was written in around the 1975s. So it's been around within sort of a very long time. But in the context of volunteering, it's what happens, if you like, when you engage with an organisation or engage at that point at which you connect. So it's that emotional element of being connected. So you would join an organisation, or you'd apply for an organisation, for example, and that psychological contract would be like about how you're journeyed through that time. So it's variable. And in terms of volunteering, psychological contracts are nuanced because of you know, like we've just listened to Heather, and all of those elements that are brought in through just volunteering. So yeah, psychological contracts have been around in terms of employment as well, and business for a very, very long time. There is it's quite a bit on it. Don't ask me to name the academic studies on that, but it goes back into the 1970s where psychological contracts were there. And so in terms of what we're thinking about is that what happens when a volunteer and organisations connect, and what is that connection between each other? What are the expectations that they both have for each other? Sometimes written and unwritten. So those assumptions and non-assumptions. So it's that moment, if you like, of where does that relationship begin? Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's great. I guess, am I right in thinking that the general argument is that while volunteers don't have an employment contract the same as paid employees would have, some people have assumed that means that volunteers are kind of able to come and go from organisations because they don't have that kind of formal legally binding contract. But the argument is that actually a psychological contract that we have, what attaches us to that organisation psychologically, can be in fact even more of a greater attachment than the legal contracts. That's some of the discussions, isn't it? I think within the literature. Is that fair enough?
That sort of sums it up. So it's more about that expectation of behaviours with the volunteer and the organisation, what they can expect, how they can do it. So it's like you say, Andrew, in terms of an employee contract, you have a contract. In terms of employment or in volunteering, that's not the case. So psychological contracts is something to perhaps consider.
Thank you very much. The next question was around emotional support, and it was a question that was from Vita Terry that was to you, Carol, but I think actually it'd be really interesting to hear from Heather as well, because you mentioned this in your presentation. So the question was, did you find that charity leaders provide emotional support? It could be practical kind of emotional support for volunteers to address their emotional demands, particularly during the pandemic. But I know, Carol, you said your research was before the pandemic. So was there emotional support provided for volunteers? But Heather, you did mention that that was an important kind of part of what you were recognising you need to do. So it'd be interesting to hear what you did. So first, Carol, whether it was something you found, and then Heather, your experiences of providing that practical emotional support would be really interesting. Thank you.
So just following on from that, the element of psychological contracts, if you like, but one of several of the organisational lead participants actually referred to the importance of that emotional supervision and being nuanced in their engagement with their volunteers and the importance of that. So yes, there was that discussion about how volunteers are supervised, not in that structured supervised way that we talk about, but in a sense that they can come together and talk about that emotionally as well. And that was important for the volunteers to feel included. And so it goes a little bit beyond than that. So extending how volunteers felt that they were involved in the organisation as well. And there was part of the research that we unpicked that those who were in a national organisation sometimes could feel slightly disconnected from the leadership, with those with, like Heather's just explained, those in very grassroots or small community felt very close to that. So I guess that would then shift how the constructs around supervision or gathering or being there or that relationship is conducted. So yeah.
Thank you. Heather, reflections from you on providing that emotional support as well.
It's been quite a huge part of COVID, really. I think some of our volunteers are ex-carers, and so they're very much on their own and they're very able. But I think the isolation and various aspects of this has just triggered all sorts of problems. And so it has been vital just to keep very steady for them. And also the people who volunteer occasionally, that they don't feel lost and then not valued anymore because there isn't an obvious job for them to do. So it's been very important to, the people we don't see so often, to make sure that they're okay. And so there's been a lot of that. But also, I mean, because we're so small, I've been on the receiving end. I broke a wrist. And so, people were brilliant. A couple of the volunteers who don't live very close brought round soup. So it's been a two-way thing. But on a sort of serious level, it has been it's a real problem, and standing down volunteers is hugely distressing for them, and it's bad not to be volunteering when you've been doing it so much. It has quite a distressing effect on your self-esteem and on your emotional life, I think. So it's a very important factor.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's particularly important when, as you mentioned, kind of we have, for want of a better word, kind of service users or people who've had experience of the thing that they're kind of then supporting. It's really important that that kind of support is there, isn't it? And one of the things I was hearing about kind of prior to COVID was a concern about burnout amongst volunteers, particularly those volunteers who had experience of the kind of issue, I suppose, that they were then kind of volunteering to support. So I think that can only intensify through COVID in terms of how stretched and emotionally kind of demanding it is. Thank you for that. Had another question, this time from Matthew Cobble, about concerns about volunteers, particularly long-term volunteers, disengaging with organisations through COVID. So a question about how much you think that has to do with the fact that we're often using volunteers to achieve similar objectives but in different ways, and potentially feeling that we're breaking some of the aspects of the psychological contracts with volunteers. So they're feeling, you know, this isn't what we signed up to do. So is that kind of an issue we were seeing kind of before COVID, and particularly during COVID? Has it affected the engagement of volunteers with organisations over time? So any reflections from either of you on that?
We didn't have a problem before because they're so engaged, because it's a practical activity which all the volunteers seem to find terribly enjoyable themselves. They themselves are getting something out of it personally, as well as doing it with the beneficiaries, because it's singing and it's sociability and that sort of thing. So we've rarely had problems of burnout or people saying that they're burned out. They almost say they're revived by it. But during COVID, it has been hard with some to find something meaningful for them to do. And in a sense, I think they probably are glad of the time. Some of the more distant volunteers are glad of the time just to deal with their own concerns. And if there is an ever after, they would come back. But that's a hard thing to think of at the moment. It's hard to think that that will ever happen.
So some people have been able to adapt to the kind of changing.
Some people have been fine, yeah.
And some people have stepped back, and some people have kind of stepped in, maybe.
Some people have stepped forward massively, yes, unexpectedly.
Carol, how about yourself? Any reflections on that question?
I think there was one of the things that we identified. I suppose it's that stuff of motivations and the complexity around that. It's not straightforward, but one of the stuff that we picked up was around whole reasons why people volunteer in the first instance. That's just a whole other debate, I think, and I think that's why the question, certainly there is an element of fatigue, and that's how do organisations, again looking at the model of, you know, valuing that, how can we then help prevent burnout or compassion fatigue from happening, you know, especially at this time, because we are all, you know, in this journey of managing what we're managing, regardless of whether we're volunteer or beneficiaries. So, you know, one of the things is to asking the motivations of why people volunteer. Don't always get, you know, that is fraught with complexity in its own right, because of whether that's pro-social or self-interest. But yeah, it is definitely there about compassion fatigue, and it's a challenge for all of us, I think, within the voluntary sector.
A related question that's come in here from Vita Terry, who was asking, I think very much related to that last question, in terms of whether, Helen, you had to kind of digitally upskill your volunteers to be able to provide those activities online. How that would have worked when you were only kind of meeting with them remotely, and whether there was any issues of kind of digital exclusion I guess both either for the volunteers or for the service users as well.
I mean, with service users, we just had to reckon that only the newsletter was sort of relevant to people who were tech savvy, and that other people would have to provide the newsletter on paper and actually back it up with personal contact. We can't contact people via Zoom. We can't do things like that. We can't upskill them. I know that in Leeds, they've done some fantastic work in trying to upskill couples living with dementia who weren't digitally skilled. But from what I hear from some of the people that I deal with, particularly one young couple who are very digitally savvy, they say they don't enjoy anything involving Skype and Zoom. They don't want that. They want personal contact. In terms of the committee members and those doing the actual work of writing the newsletter, some of us have had to become a lot more digitally savvy than we were. We do have one tech expert who's been very good in helping us that. We've still got lots to learn, but there have been problems there. I mean, someone managed to drop out of a meeting because his Wi-Fi dropped him. And his loss of self-esteem at the end of the meeting, when we managed to pick him up again, was such that, because it was at a sensitive moment for him, he was saying, I think I should withdraw from the committee. I can't even hold a meeting together. It took massive reassurance that, this happens to everybody. And so the tech aspect felt very destructive. He'd felt so excluded because he'd suddenly seen faces of the people he knew and then was excluded from it. It was a very destructive moment somehow. So we try not to rely on tech more than we have to. I mean, we're emailing constantly, so of course we do. But in terms of our beneficiaries, we try to do as much as possible that doesn't rely on tech.
Thank you. A really important reminder of both the power of technology to engage people we wouldn't have been able to otherwise, but also the limits of it and the challenges it presents. So thank you for that. Final question, I think, for this session. So this is a question that's come from Catherine Venter. So I'm just going to read this out. So this is a question for you, Heather. Whether you had felt, I wondered what you had felt had been learnt from all those innovative approaches that you've taken to tackle the challenges of COVID, and what it would mean for how you might take that kind of forward into the post kind of pandemic volunteering environment. So what have you kind of been learning, and how might you kind of take the best bits of that, I suppose, forward in the future?
I think the big thing we've learned, although I think we knew it, was that there's no substitute for face-to-face and actually seeing somebody and speaking to them, and that actually interacting with them directly, even if on the phone, is the major thing we can do. I mean, I don't know what we're going to be allowed to do after COVID. I mean, we've got this cohort of people, and I fear for them that they'll never dare come out again. Life will have moved on. They're becoming agoraphobic. We know that. But dementia doesn't stop still, and there will be always waves of new people with dementia. And we may be able to set up, the videos were jolly helpful, but I don't know, this Zoom singing and things, I don't think it works. I just don't think it works. We've got to find more ways. There will be a post-pandemic thing, and we'll adapt. But at the moment, we just haven't thought that far. We're just trying desperately to uphold and keep afloat the people that we've got. And I think we're managing it. We keep thinking of wizard wheezes, but it's just a matter of holding them together. But we will find other ways. But yeah, I mean, I think we found that newsletters are great. Email's great.
Thank you very much indeed. So thank you to both our speakers, to Carol and to Heather. That's been a really fascinating session. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who have posted questions. We are now going to have a break. So we've got half an hour break. So we're going to leave Zoom running, but we'll turn off our screens so we can also go and have a break. And we'll see you back here at 2:30. At 2:30, we're going to have another two speakers. We're going to hear from Jane South and from Mike Locke, who are going to look at the links between volunteering and health inequality. So maybe picking up on some of the things that we just kind of finished the conversation with there. So go and all have a cup of tea, a refresh, and we shall look forward to seeing you at 2:30. But can we all, hard to do remotely, but a thank you to Heather and Carol for your excellent sessions this morning. Thank you very much. I'll clap for you. I'm sure.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us.
See you again in the panel at the end, but thank you for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I wonder which one I am. I'm two people, aren't I? And we're still broadcasting. I just thought I'd alert you to that.
I'm going to stop recording for now, Jürgen.
Yep. Hang on. All too exciting.
Shall I go and make a cup of tea?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, Heather.
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
please.
Feel free to turn your video off, Heather, if you want, and your mute. Put it on mute, and then you can.